Hello and welcome back to another disassembly tutorial. In this video I am taking apart the Canon EOS 6D. This video should cover almost all the steps on how to service your camera. But before we move on, I would like to say thank you to all the new subscribers of this channel. This means really much for me. I also realized that according to the analytics of the channel, almost 97% of the viewers are not subscribed. This doesn't mean that you necessarily need to subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate your contribution. This is a contribution at zero cost, which that means that at least a thumbs up will be really welcomed. And I do hope to get more likes and subscribes rather than dislikes. Okay, so next step before we start the taking apart the camera, I really recommend, as always, to take your battery out of the camera and not leave it inside, because that it may create lots of damage. Okay, so next step is by taking all the rubbers of the camera off. As you can see, I'm already starting to use the plastic tool. If I was about to use a metal, definitely I will risk to leave lots of scratches on the body of the camera. Okay, so this is the last rubber. If the camera was never opened, sometimes it's quite hard to take these rubbers out. I will really recommend to use the even a hair dryer to soften a bit the adhesive, the double tape that you have on these rubbers. Okay, so next is by taking the left side of the camera off, and by taking these white screws on the top. They are both screws the same, they have the same size. By the way, remember every time where you put the screws in order to not create any kind of confusion when you're gonna need to put them back. Okay, so next is this black screw. And this is slightly different. Okay, so we have now our left side cover, it's off. Next step is by taking the back of the camera off. We have few screws over here. Again, remember to keep your order of the screws. I always prefer to start with the top and going down. As you can see, there are few hidden screws. So now we are taking the bottom screws. These screws are slightly different between them. Also try to not mix them. These two ones are the same. There's another screw hidden underneath the battery door. If you want to take the battery door out, you need to flip that black tab, and in that way you're gonna release the proper door of the battery. Sometimes it's quite hard to take these screws out, and I definitely recommend to use the proper screwdriver, or otherwise there's a high risk to damage them and not be able to take them out after, or even you might struggle to take them out. So next step is by disconnecting the back from the main board of the camera, the back that connects the back connector. Okay, so next step, I'm gonna take the main components of the back of the camera. Some other components I'm not gonna take them completely out. I'm gonna just explain few things on how to how eventually to take them out. I don't want to mess around too much with this part, which because I need it as it is. But just in order to show you how to do it, I'm gonna try to cover the most of it. You must be quite careful when you take this tape off. Okay, so next step is by disconnecting the LCD screen and other connections. Okay, so the next step is by taking off the LCD driver. If you have problems with your LCD, for example, you have no light on the LCD, but you manage to see that the LCD works and the backlight in some way doesn't work, the problem might be caused by the LCD driver and not by the LCD itself. Okay, so the next step is by taking the screws of the LCD out. The screws are all the same. So in case you need to replace the LCD, this is the way to do it. So as I mentioned earlier, I am not going to take this part completely. I'm just going to take this setup button and selection. I'm going to take it out since it's quite easy. But the rest of this this part, the rest of the back of the camera, I'm just going to mention a few things. So if you have problems with your setup button or directional buttons on this component, you need to, this is the way to replace it. Okay, so next step, I'm gonna take this metal plate out, and unfortunately the flat cable that is stays underneath here, it's a one piece that connects to everything. And if you ever need to take this out, you're gonna need to be quite careful, and you also gonna need to use I do recommend to use a hair dryer or some sort of heat to soften the adhesive in order to replace the part. So I am taking these screws out now. These screws are all the same. There's only one screw that is different. You can quite notice it's slightly different. The head of the screw is slightly bigger. So this is the screw that I was mentioning about, which is slightly different. Okay, be careful when we take this part away from its position. So as you can see, there's one flat cable that connects with everything, for the buttons, for the selectors, also for the buzzer. So if you want to take this part out, just take the two screws on over here, and then you're gonna have some layers. It's like layers of different metals. And once you take that two screws out, you're gonna release the button on the back. Next is if you have problems with the rubber of the buttons, this is the way to replace it. Or either you have any printed, the prints on the button itself goes washed away, and you want to replace them, or for whatever reason you want to replace these buttons, this is the way to do it. This is the buzzer. The buzzer is very delicate. You have to be very careful when you take the flat cable out, and also the rest of it. So this selector, you need to take these two screws first, and then the third, and be very careful. If you want to take it completely out, you need to take this part off first, and then carefully disconnect the two and three screws. This again, there are a few layers underneath of metal, and then you have the brush selector. Okay, so now that we covered almost everything on the back of the camera, next step is by taking the bottom cover of the camera. This is the next step for going forward with the disassembly. Try to memorize the position. Maybe one day I'm going to explain the way I do it. I don't take any kind of I don't sign the screw and the position. I just keep order to positioning the screws in a way that helps me to put them back without having any problem, and without losing any time on writing down the type and the dimension of the screw. And also in the same time, by doing this almost every day, I do remember the screws, even if I mix them and I put them in the wrong place. But always I keep the order. Usually when I service a camera, I do prefer to take all the rubbers out in order to have more and easier access to everything. Otherwise, it makes me lose time, and I hate every time to try to move the sticky stuff aside in order to reach my screws. Okay, so now we have the bottom cover. So if you need to replace this bottom cover, now you know how to do it. Okay, so the next step is by taking the phone cover off. Definitely, in order to be able to take the front cover, you need to do the other steps. Otherwise, it will not be possible. The screws are quite hard to take them off, so you need a good screwdriver. Otherwise, you risk to damage the heads. Also, the screws are different, as you can see. These two screws are the same. The two before, they were the same. Between them, the two black ones, they were the same. This one is slightly different. It's a short screw. Another two screws on the side. And the last screw here on the bottom. Before we taking the back away, release the back, we have to disconnect the microphone, the frontal microphone that stays to the cover. So this is the front. If you need to replace it, now you know how to do it. So the next step is by taking the top of the camera off. And disconnecting all the flat cables, and also this kind of personalized tool. Here we have 3 screws to take out. One on the right hand side, another one on the left hand side underneath, and the one in the middle on the back of the camera is the viewfinder adjustment knob. And another one underneath here. Be careful not to touch the bottom side of um, the electronics with your, in this case with my screwdriver, I'm risking to touch the bottom part, and you might create some damage. Okay, so very carefully. There's another connector underneath here that must be disconnected. As you can see, again, I'm using most of the connections. I'm using the plastic tool and not a metallic tool. So this is the top of the camera. Next, I'm gonna show you disconnect most of it. I show you almost everything on the covering everything on the top cover. So if you need to replace the LCD or the shutter button or dials, also I'm going to explain. So now next I'm taking off the dial, aperture dial, and the shutter button. This is all, both are in the same unit. They have the same one component for doing the two things: aperture selector and shutter releaser or shutter connector or shutter contactor, whatever you want to call it. So by taking these three screws, you're taking out the selector. So if you have problems with this, most common problems is that the rubber slips when you try to rotate the increase or decrease your aperture. The rubber slips on the wheel itself and doesn't move anything. And also you might have problems with the shutter. If you push the shutter and nothing happens, that might be caused by moisture, water, and also dirt. So next step is by disconnecting the screen, the top LCD screen, in case you need to disconnect to replace your LCD screen. Most of the time the LCD screen, top of LCD screen is needed to be replaced in case it gets damaged, but also by water. You might get water and moisture, it might get damaged. So we need to make all these steps in order to be able to take this LCD out. Next step is by taking out the screws. Also, if you need to replace the buttons, the buttons that stays on the right hand side, on the top of the camera, on the top of the cover, this is the way to do it. So these are the rubbers from the back of the buttons that stays on the top right hand side, and the plastic buttons themselves. Next is the selection different mode, selection mode on the top of the camera rubber, and then we have the physical buttons. These buttons, they should have their own shape, so there's no way to put them wrong. Okay, so next I am taking off the GPS of the camera. So the 6D has a GPS system, so you can memorize into your pictures. You can save the GPS position. So if you have problems with this module, for whatever reason, even by water, moisture, or the camera doesn't recognize any kind of GPS signal, that's the way to do it. And next I'm taking off the Wi-Fi module. If you don't have any Wi-Fi connection, this might be the main cause. This is held in place by a double tape, so you might need to force a bit, or also I do recommend, if you want to take it easier, take it out easier, to use a hair dryer for a couple of seconds in order to release, to soften a bit the adhesive. So this is the Wi-Fi module. Okay, so next I'm not gonna take anything out, I'm just gonna explain a few things over here. So if you want to disconnect the on-off button, you're gonna need to release the selector in order to reach the button, the on-off button. And by doing the first thing, disconnecting this part, you have a spring and a ball. Be careful with that. Also, you have next to disconnect this part and then disconnect this other part at last. And once this is released by taking the screw out, you're gonna be able to take this, pull this out, the selector, and reach your button. By the way, to replace the button, you need to change the disconnect also the that brush connector. Okay, if you need to replace this, which is quite hard to do it, you have to, as I mentioned earlier, you have to disconnect everything and then release it. This is stays in place by a double tape, and over here you have to take all these pins, take the soldering from these pins in order to release the rest of the flat cable. These pins, once you release them, you can either leave them there, but if you want to replace, by whatever reason you have problems with the flash show, you can do it as I am doing it now, just to reach the the interior parts, and in this case you only need to take the 5 pins to disconnect with the soldering iron, and by taking these 4 screws you basically reach the inside part. Okay, so the next step is by taking the memory door out, replacing the memory door. If you need to replace the memory door, definitely you have to make all the steps in order to be able to take it out. Unfortunately, there's no other way to do it. Okay, so the next step is by taking the main board out, but before doing that we need to take some other parts out, which one of them is this silicone thermal pad, so-called, is something like thermal pad, and also this tape. This is not a normal tape, it's a special tape. Basically it's a double shield tape, and inside is like a sandwich tape, and inside there's some thermal paste, which this helps on keeping the camera, keeping the main board cooler, than helping for cooling down the main board processors. This is not, I believe, is not a problem for still pictures, but motion, when you have to do video, definitely this will help, and it will keep your camera cooled. So you have to be quite careful here, and also I do recommend to use a hair dryer or some heat in order to take this special tape off easier. Okay, this is another piece of that kind of a tape. The next step is by disconnecting the flat cables in order to release everything that stays connected to the main board. This is the main board to image sensor connection. If you need to, if you have, for whatever reason you have that connector damaged, you can replace it. Now I'm disconnecting all the flat cables. I do prefer to disconnect everything before taking the screws out. Okay, so next is by taking the screws out. Okay, so be careful with this uh, flat cable. There's a big connection plug. Look carefully the way I'm taking the main board out. I help to give space by bending the flat cable. It's a dodgy position over there, and you may risk to damage the flat cable. So this is the main board of the camera. There's another thermal silicone pad over here, and unfortunately Canon decided to put on this model to put the memory card directly on the main board, and in case you need to replace, you have two options. You either replace the whole main board or either replace the memory card reader, which I might be able to cover in a different video. It's recommended to put this special tape on some place where it doesn't get any dust, dirt, or anything else to damage the adhesive. And you can put it on a baking paper, or I used to put it on a stickers paper, which I found it a bit better than baking paper, but it's either both are fine. Okay, so next time I'm preparing to take out the image sensor. You have to be quite careful with this foam. It gets it breaks very easily. There's another piece of a tape here as the ones we saw before for cooling down the image sensor processor. And I prefer to disconnect the whole the tape from this other side instead for disconnecting the metal plate on the image sensor itself and disconnecting the tape. To me, it seems a bit easier. Also, you have to be very careful and patient to do this kind of operation. Again, you can use a heat gun or hair dryer. As you can see, I'm giving the time to the tape to come off. I'm not pushing more than is necessary. There are some other steps to make in order to disconnect the image sensor. So this is the tripod plate, the bottom plate, which you have the tripod screw connection. These screws are all the same. This is a tiny plate. Just remember to put it back. If you have a damaged thread on the camera tripod connection, by replacing this plate you can solve your problem. Okay, so we're getting closer to disconnect our image sensor. Still we have some other things to disconnect. So I am taking next the bottom plate, and again I'm disconnecting taking off all the connections and then taking the screws. Canon made a very clever move by adding that little hole in the middle of the flats. It's I found it very handy. Unfortunately, not all the brands are using this kind of feature, and sometimes it's really hard to take the flats out, and there's a high risk to create a damage. It's so easy. For example, Fujifilm, they are doing, the flats are way thinner than the rest of the brands do, and it's really hard to take them out without risking to damage the flats. Okay, so these are the last connection points. As you can see, I'm disconnecting these cables from the front and not from the back. And they were made to be disconnected from the front. And definitely you have to use a plastic tool because they are so soft, and they're getting damaged so easily. All these screws are all the same. So the bottom plate is mostly for powering the mirror box, everything that stays on the mirror box, and if you have problems with your mirror box, you should take in consideration this little electronic plate. Also, if you have water damage, there's a high risk to water infiltrates coming from the bottom and reach quite easily the electronic plate. Okay, so going forward to reach our image sensor by taking these two screws out and releasing this plate. Okay, so now we have everything out of the way in order to release our image sensor. As you can see, Canon again is using for calibrating the image sensor, they are using springs and not anymore as they used to do in the past with spacers. Spacers was a good thing on how to if you wanted to take the image sensor out and put it back. It was an easy way to do it. Now you have to recalibrate every time you take the screws from the image sensor out. You have to recalibrate the sensor. There's another way to do it. Probably I'm going to cover in another video. It's like a basic way. I don't know how to call it. It's a stupid way to do it, but still helps to get very close to the original position of the image sensor. And by doing that is by counting the spins of each screw, assigning the screw and counting the spins on of each screw. And when you place back the image sensor, you're gonna need to put the same identical screws in the same position, and you will need to count back the spins of each screw. So now this is the last step. There's another piece of tape over here. Yeah, the Canon bombarded this camera with cooling system, which is not a bad thing. Anyhow, don't forget to take the springs out. Okay, so next step will be by taking off the top power board, DC power board. So this is basically the board that powers the whole camera. And actually this is the top power board, and there's the bottom board, the one that we took it earlier, is kind of a power board, but for the mirror box. So there's a double tape underneath here. You either use a heat gun or do it directly. The screws are not all the same. There's another two connections on the back. One is for the main connector that comes directly from the battery, and the other one that connects with the bottom power board. So this is the DC of the Canon 6D. Okay, so now going forward with the disassembly, and this is the cable that connects between the two power boards. Next, we are preparing to take the mirror box out, and we need to do as follow. There's this flat cable has a double tape underneath. So as you can see, I'm trying to take this out very carefully. You can heat up that part in order to take it off easier. So the next step is by taking this kind of lever, this kind of a bridge. Next step is by disconnecting this point here, where it is this flat cable connects. Be sure you disconnect this point, otherwise when you're gonna take the mirror box out, you might snap it. Okay, so these are the screws that release the mirror box. These first four screws are all the same. As you can see, the mirror box came out. So next step, I'm gonna disconnect few key points over here. I'm gonna show you how to replace the shutter unit. So these are the screws that you have to take out in order to release the shutter. These screws are all the same. So the good thing with Canon, most of especially the new versions, in order to replace the mirror, in order to replace the shutter, you don't need to place any kind of neutral position of the shutter in order to match with the mirror. The camera will do it by itself, even if something is not on its a neutral position, the camera will do it automatically once you power on the camera. Okay, so the next step, I'm going to take the viewfinder off in case someone needs to replace the viewfinder or give it a complete clean of the optics of the viewfinder. And just wanted to show you how it's done. I'm not going to show you how to clean the optics, but at least I'm going to show you how to take the viewfinder off. So you need to disconnect these two flat cables. Very gently you have to pull that away. So now I'm taking these screws. There should be like 4 or 6 screws. We're gonna see next. These two screws are both the same. I know you barely see it, but be careful not to mislead the screw and by taking out the right one. Plenty of screws around here. So these screws, these last two screws are all, basically all four screws are the same. Okay, so this is the viewfinder, the optics. As I said, I'm not gonna open it completely. I'm not gonna open this this block. I'm gonna leave it as it is. In my case, it's clean, but if you want to give it a clean, just continue to open the other screws. Okay, so next step, I'm gonna take the flat connection from the top of the pentaprism. This part is extremely easy to damage it, so be very careful when you're about to take it out. As you can see, this screw is shorter than the ones I took off earlier. So since this stays on the top of the camera, you might need to replace it. One of the main causes is because of the water damage, even rain. Since it's on the very top of the camera, some water may infiltrates from the top when the flash show stays, and this is the first point that the water may get in contact. So actually the pentaprism now it's free. It's just held by two spacers that stays on the side of the pentaprism block itself. There's a tiny glue on the very front of it, and I believe on the sides, that holds the block. Okay, so now I disconnect it from its proper place. Yeah, there is glue on the front and the sides. As you can see, there's a tiny drop of glue that holds it in place. Be careful to not lose the spacers. There are two black spacers on the sides, and this other white spacer. If you lose this spacer, you might lose the proper calibration or position of the pentaprism. This part also is very delicate, so you must be very careful when you try to work with it. As you can see, I'm trying to take the first spacer from the side. Is that black plastic? And there's another one placed here. Because of the glue, it remained on the side. can see there's some glue here. You might ask yourself why I am taking that part off, why I was opening the pentaprism. Again, most of the most common problem might be the water residue, so you might need to clean it. So that's the way to do it. Okay, so going forward, now I am taking off the microphone connection and the remote control. So if you have problems with either the remote control or the microphone jack, Canon did a good thing that you can individually replace it, and not they decide not to put it directly on the motherboard, which is a good thing. Otherwise, in case you have damage, you either have two options, or you need to replace the whole motherboard or replace the jack itself. So this is the battery connector that connects directly with the DC-DC power board. Next, I'm going to try to get the last flat that stays on this middle frame of the camera. And by disconnecting this, I'm taking out the white strap ring or holder. There's a piece of a rubber over there just to protect against dust and few drops of water. Unfortunately, this camera is not completely sealed, and to be honest, only few cameras they are fully sealed, and not even the top, the most expensive, the professional category of the manufacturers, they don't have a fully water sealed cameras. Okay, so what I'm trying to do here is to release, by taking this cover, I'm gonna reach the last 2 points that I can disconnect. And this is quite important because over here we have 2 contactors. It's slide contactors. This is one that comes from the battery door, and basically every time you open the door of the battery, the camera shuts off. So might happen, and the other one is for the memory card. Again, there's another switch, power switch. It's a contactor, a slide contactor, and this one, as you can see, there's a tiny pin on the very end of it. Sometimes that might get broken, and your camera, in that case, your camera, when you try to close the doors, your camera will not power on, just because that slider is not moving at all. It stays always open, and that basically shuts off the power of the camera. Okay, so this one is for the, as I mentioned earlier, for the battery. And the LED light for the memory card that shows when the memory card is reading. The camera reads the memory card data. Okay, so in order to open this other part, we need to take almost everything over here. As you can see, this one is not that easy to take it off. Right, so this basically is the last part that we had to take from the camera. So this by doing this completes the fully disassembly of the Canon EOS 6D. I really hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed to take all this camera apart. And if you're still here and if you like what you see, I really consider I really appreciate if you put a thumbs up, and why not to subscribe to see more more content, similar content. I'm gonna try to put more videos of similar, and also to cover some other problems that we might get to on our cameras. And thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.